Good afternoon, morning or evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome, especially to Marion, Terry's partner in life. We're here to remember Terry McDonough, and to celebrate his life, which was a full life, but a relatively short one, as it turned out. And over the next hour and a half or thereabouts, people who knew him well will talk about Terry, about his family life, and about his intellectual work through which he contributed both to the academy and in a significant way to progressive causes, trade union, socialist and environmental. I'm John Cunningham, and with Sarah Ann Buckley, I'm hosting this memorial event from the Irish Centre for the Histories of Labour and Class at the Moore Institute in NUI Galway. Terry was a colleague in the university, as you'll know. He was a chair of our union section and an activist in the union, and a founder of the Irish Centre for the Histories of Labour and Class in 2013, and a strong supporter after that. Indeed, he attracted one of our largest audiences to a seminar when he dissected Thomas Piketty's Capital alongside his then student, Cian McMahon, who was the key organizer of this memorial. And we were pleased to be able to assist Marion and Cian in putting this together. So with those few words, I'll hand over to Sarah Ann, who will introduce people for the next while, and I'll see you again later on.
Thanks, John, and thanks to everyone for attending today. I'm going to say very little now, just hand over to Marion, Terry's life partner, for our first contribution, and that'll be followed by Cian McMahon. So do we have Marion?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, everybody, and thanks for zooming in here today. This is a great honor for me and Terry's family to have this event. And I know it was David Cotts who first came up with the idea shortly after Terry died, and then he and Cian McMahon did a lot of the heavy lifting over on stateside, and then here in Galway, John Cunningham, yourself, and Dan Carey did a lot of the Galway work. People always asked us, when they met us together, how did we meet? Because we were probably not a very likely couple. So Terry loved this, and he loved the story, and he would have a big smiley head on him, and he'd be saying, Marion, you tell it. So I tell it again. We first actually met in 1974. Terry and me were both studying in Dublin, and we were staying with the same family, because you stayed with families then. There was no student accommodation as such. So we were there living with the family, and every morning we'd have breakfast together. And Terry was like the cool dude, hippie type, and I was very shy. And he was pretty shy in spite of looking like the cool dude, hippie type. So every morning we got on great chatting about the breakfast and about what we're going to do and all. But he never asked me out. So in 1990, 16 years later, he came on a trip to Ireland with his dad, and he asked to meet up for lunch. So here he comes rocking up for a date with his dad in tow. So it didn't actually seem that great an idea, but actually we were both unclaimed treasures at that time, and we got together and we got married 2 years later. Terry had a lot of very quirky interests that people probably wouldn't know about. So when he wasn't doing his academic work, he studied evolution, he studied quantum physics, critical theory, and he had a big interest in Haida Indian art, Northwest American coast Indian art. And we have a lot of that art and artifacts in our house. And he loved tropical fish, but his big passion above all was Szechuan cooking, Szechuan Indian or Szechuan Chinese food. Mm-hmm. So that was his whole thing from the late 70s. I see Jeff Sale laughing there, and Judy. And he loved to cook Szechuan food. And before I met Terry, food was just food, But when I met Terry, I realized that food was not just food. we'd go to a restaurant to find a restaurant in a foreign city, and he would do so much research that it would be nearly enough to write a conference paper about it, because the restaurant was so important. Finally, I just say that Terry and I had 30 great years together. We did so much together. And next Tuesday, it will be 6 months since he passed away. And I miss him every day. I miss his quiet presence in the house. And I'm sure a lot of you do too. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marion. That was beautiful. Thank you very much. I know whenever I would see yourself and Terry walk into any of our events, I would know we had two friends there, so everything would be all right, even if there was others who didn't agree. Our next speaker is Cian McMahon, and this when Cian came to myself and John, it was straight away we were like, this is should be done, and we really wanted to be involved. But Cian did this work, just to say that from myself and John, and also just to thank Dan and Matthew Geraghty from the Moore, and also to thank SIPTU and the Department of Economics. Most of you probably know Cian. Cian was one of Terry's PhD students and friends, and he is beaming in from Nova Scotia, and we obviously wish he was in Galway, but I'll just pass it over to you, Cian.
Thanks, Sarah. And I wish I was in Galway a lot myself, and in Wards with a creamy pint of Guinness this evening, but unfortunately. But yeah, I just wanted to say kind of a few short words to set the scene really for the speakers who are going to follow, and the logic of kind of who we've brought together. And as Marion kind of said, it was David Cott's initial idea to have an online event, given the breadth of Terry's kind of reach, I suppose, both across the Atlantic from Ireland to the US, but also across the Pacific from the US to China. And you know, around the time that David brought this up, Terry's sister Bridget, who's with us too, had raised the idea, or had written a piece rather, on Terry's kind of younger years, and this planted the seed for David to write a piece on his academic years. Terry's niece, Catherine Wiley, who's here too, had written a piece for the Irish News that we could start hanging everything on, and so that gave us a nice basis. Bridget then suggested bringing Jeff Tail on board, who was Terry's kind of childhood friend and a comrade for many years through into adulthood. And given Terry's family background as an Irish American, tracing back to the famine years, we thought it very important to bring Eamon Slater on board. And given the History Centre, they've done a lot of work on the Irish famine. Likewise, we have Maria Alejandra Gonzalez Perez and Brian O'Boyle as Terry's students. So we can see that almost fatherly kind of aspect of Terry's life within NUIG. And then what's kind of not always appreciated, and I must admit even myself, the extent of Terry's activism, not just as a community and labour educator, but really as an organiser and coordinator, getting his hands dirty outside of the ivory tower as such. But we brought on Anne Irwin from the Galway City Community Network, Tish Gibbons from SIPTU College, Vicky Donnelly, who sends her apologies from the One World Centre. She can't be here today, but we've brought all the contributions together in a little booklet, and Vicky has a lovely piece in there. And finally, Steve Thornton from the Shanty School in Hartford in Connecticut, who worked with Terry in the 70s, you know, both teaching and as a community activist. And, you know, if all of that gets a little bit heavy, we have Sarah Clancy and Lillis O'Leary giving some, I suppose, respite in terms of poetry and music in the interlude. So I think it's all shaped up really nicely, and just want to thank everyone for kind of being so cooperative throughout the whole thing. Obviously, the Centre for the Histories of Labour and Class what was the kind of organisational base to bring on the Moore, the Economics Department in SIPTU. And just to say, you know, very finally, on a personal note, you know, I had a great deal of kind of admiration and respect and gratitude to Terry as it was, but after this whole process, I only come away with even more so, because Terry was so understated, and many aspects of his life and work I kind of had a passing awareness of, and this has really helped me, and I hope it helps everyone else here to get a bit closer to to understanding the person Terry was. And you know, he was quite the operator, quite the bio. So you know, I hope we can do him justice today, and I hope we can bring his kind of his message and his ideals and practice forward. Hopefully we can all add up to something approximating one Terry. So I'll hand back over to Sarah Ann, and I'll shut up for the minute. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Cian. And I should say people are doing it already, but please use the chat if you want to put any recollections or any comments on. We've got some surprise at the quantum physics already from people who knew him well, Marion. So as Cian said, the way that the seminar is going, we're going now to start as Terry's childhood, and it's probably for some people who knew Terry as older to think of Terry as a child even. It's probably so we have his sister Bridget, who is beaming in from Arizona. So Bridget, I'll hand it over to you.
Hello everyone, my name is Bridget McDonough and I'm Terry's sister. Now you all know that Terry was an American, but most of you, I think, didn't meet Terry until he was an adult, or maybe even till after he moved to Ireland. So I'm going to give you a little background on Terry's family and his childhood. In Terry's immediate family, there was Jim, his father, who is 98 years old and still alive. Our mother, Lois, who died in 1989. And then two younger sisters, me, Bridget, 3.5 years younger, and then Colleen, 5 years younger. On this side of the family, Terry has two brothers-in-law, my husband, Bob, and Colleen's husband, Jim. And he has one niece, just one, his only blood niece, who is Claire Lockery, and she's just graduating this year from Seton Hall in New Jersey. Now, we all have very Irish names, but you know, we have to admit we're really not that Irish. My mother's side of the family, her ancestors came from the Alsace-Lorraine region of France, but they were German speakers, so they were German. And my father's side of the family was actually both Swedish and Irish. So we do have to admit that Terry was really only about 25% of Irish descent. But we had very Irish names, obviously. Because all our immigrant ancestors, actually, they came in the 19th century, that made Terry a fourth generation American. Terry was born in Pasadena, California. And the reason he was born out on the West Coast was my folks were out there for a couple of years with my dad's work. But when Terry was still a baby, they moved back to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where they had met and where my father was an electrical engineer with a large industrial firm, Alice Chalmers. In 1957, they built a house in the western suburbs of Milwaukee, and that's where we all grew up. The house stayed in the family for 35 years. Now, my parents recognized Terry's intellect pretty young. When he was a preschooler, he was mad for dinosaurs. And he could name all the dinosaurs in the picture books. And when he got to the first grade and he was learning to read and write and spell, he raised his hand and he asked the teacher, "How do you spell brontosaurus?" And his mathematic abilities also surfaced young when in preschool, the kids were having a tricycle race. And all the little kids lined up their tricycles and they were going to race around a round track. And when the race was over, Terry told my father, "I rode on the inside track because it was shorter than the outside track." So Terry was also mad for rocks, minerals, fossils, agates, stalactites, stalagmites, anything having to do with rocks or minerals. And we all thought when he was a kid that he was going to grow up to be a paleontologist or a geologist. Now, my sister and I have been talking and we realized that, you know, our main memory of Terry is really that he was always in his room reading or studying. when it came to sports, you can well imagine Terry was not very good and not too interested. So giving my parents credit, they really did not push that. Instead, they encouraged him in things he could actually excel at, like his rock collection or merit badges for the Boy Scouts. And he attended the local parish school. We all did. He attended St. John Vianney Grade School, 1st through 8th grade. And then when he graduated 8th grade, he was accepted into Marquette University High School, which was a Jesuit all boys Catholic high school in downtown Milwaukee. So now I'll let Jeff Thale take it from here. Thanks.
Thanks. Thanks, Bridget. Thanks to all of you for organizing this. I'm Jeff Thale. I'm really honored to be here today, and I'm very happy to remember Terry, and very sad about his death. Terry and I met at Marquette High, the Jesuit boys high school that Bridget just mentioned in Milwaukee. We were friends and comrades for many years. At school, so in our high school, Terry was really one of the leaders of a small group of student radicals and hippies and anti-war activists all sort of mushed together. We were all involved in everything from opposing the school dress code and its restrictions on how long we could have our hair to defending draft board raiders and sort of everything in between. One of the big things Terry was involved with was organizing sort of inspired by Freedom Schools, inspired by Summerhill, organizing a student-led alternative school with no grades, no dress code, and no curriculum that we thought would make us cogs in the corporate machine. That school got set up. It was called Milwaukee Independence School. Terry was really eager to join it, and not surprisingly, Lois and Jim McDonough were pretty reluctant to have him move from an elite, very academic Catholic school to this pretty chaotic student-run alternative in a house on the east side of Milwaukee. But the Marquette authorities called Jim and Lois in to complain about Terry's behavior, and Jim felt so disrespected, at least as Terry told the story. Jim felt so disrespected by their treatment of him and their attitude toward Terry that he said, "We are withdrawing him." And to Terry's delight, he left that day and spent the last year of school in this kind of alternative environment. So Terry and I had a lot of shared experiences together. We wrote our first political leaflet together in 1971. There was a march to raise funds against hunger and for charities, and we distributed several thousand copies of a leaflet saying that hunger was a result of inequality and the structural problems of capitalism and couldn't be solved through charity. In 1972, we organized our first political demonstration together, a protest against Richard Nixon's renomination as the Republican candidate for president. We probably had more police at the demonstration than actual participants, but we viewed it as a big success. We were roommates over the years for a summer in an abandoned farmhouse in northern Wisconsin. And then again, when Terry did an internship at the Shanty School in Hartford. Terry went to Goddard College, a college about as experimental as the last high school he attended. While he was there, he did a number of internships. One of them was at the Shanty School, a public alternative school in Hartford, where Steve is. I was there at the same time because I did my alternative service the end of the Vietnam War there, and Terry and I were roommates there again. And of course, while Terry was at Goddard, that's when he did the semester abroad where he met Marion in Dublin. Terry had been very interested in education and education as a way to oppose sort of the political system. When he graduated, he returned to Hartford and taught for 2 more years at the Shanty School. And then I think he turned really to more sort of direct political activism. He got really deeply involved in community organizing efforts and really in the national debates about the post-Vietnam left, where it should go, and in what was then called the New Communist Movement. That led to his interest in left-wing economics. That ultimately led him to UMass, University of Massachusetts Amherst, for his doctorate. And while there, he continued his activism. I think he was part of a local collective in the Pioneer Valley. He did labor and activist work. He was part of the editorial collective of a journal called Theoretical Review, kind of rethinking Marxism and the American left. He was the editor of another journal later called Socialist Politics, and then of one called North Star Review as the US left, the sort of post-Vietnam generation went through all of its rethinking. After he finished at UMass, Terry got a teaching job at Canisius College in Buffalo. It's pretty hard for somebody who's an openly a Marxist economist to find an academic job, as probably a number of people on this Zoom will know. Terry once told me that he got the job at Canisius because the majority of the faculty were older Keynesians, and they were damned if they would have they would rather have a Marxist than a young neoliberal on the faculty. So that's how he got the job. He stayed at Canisius, and he stayed in Buffalo, I think, for 5 years before he re-encountered Marion, and then their relationship began, and he moved to Ireland. So Terry was a serious intellectual. He certainly wasn't shy about expressing or defending his political opinions. He was also, for me, a great friend, tremendously supportive, willing to listen. We shared, whoa, boy. We shared the details of our personal and our romantic lives for many years. Terry held the chuppah at my sort of Catholic Jewish wedding. He loved politics, as everyone here knows. He also loved movies. We went to millions of movies together. He loved food. I think he had his first Szechuan food in Hartford, actually, and he loved books. Terry was an activist, an intellectual, a comrade, and a friend, and I really miss him.
Thanks, Jeff. That's yeah, thanks very much. We're going to move on to, well, you set it up to Terry, his academic life, I guess, and the beginnings of it. So David Kotz, who's speaking from his home study in Western Massachusetts, is going to lead us now.
I first met Terry in 1979 when I was in my first year as an assistant professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and Terry was a first-year doctoral student. At that time, the UMass Amherst Economics Department was one of several in the US that had hired a bunch of Marxist faculty. As a result, we attracted many doctoral students who wanted to change the world, and Terry was among them. Terry enrolled in a small class in US economic history that I taught that year. The students were all activists and sometimes a bit challenging for the instructor. One day I canceled the class since I was ill, but the students, not recognizing that I had any special authority to do that, they went ahead and held the class without me. Terry became interested in social structure of accumulation theory, abbreviated SSA theory, a new theory of stages of capitalism. SSA theory offers an analysis of the forces that lead to alternations between a long period of rapid economic expansion and a long period of economic crisis. He decided to do his doctoral dissertation on that theory with me as his committee chair. Some doctoral students do a relatively quick dissertation on a topic that is abandoned after its completion to turn in other directions. For Terry, SSA theory would define his academic trajectory and major research interest. While Terry was in graduate school, we worked together in building a new popular economics institution at UMass Amherst, the Center for Popular Economics. It ran summer institutes and workshops for progressive activists in many different movements, including the trade union movement, peace, anti-poverty, women's rights, Black and Latinx rights, and environmental movements. It was an exciting project that brought together local activists who often had an ungenerous view of academic folks with our group of Marxist academics. Somehow, we all got along well, at least in the end, and each side learned from the other. In the mid-1980s, Terry and I decided to join the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, which was then a small, sleepy, and rather moderate organization. Its roots were in the pre-World War I American Socialist Party, and also came out of an organization from the American New Left of the 1960s, the New American Movement. Terry and I decided to form a tiny Marxist caucus at DSA's annual conventions, which was tolerated by the bemused older leadership who had distant memories of their own youthful interest in Marxism. It turned out DSA was not going anywhere at that time. It would take decades of an increasingly oppressive form of capitalism and the rise of both Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders to suddenly propel DSA from 8,000 members to 95,000 members that it has today. The SSA analysis that Terry and I had been working on turned out to be designed to analyze such developments. In 1985, Terry left Amherst to take a faculty job at Canisius College in Buffalo, New York, as Jeff mentioned. In 1992, he moved again, this time to take up a visiting fellow position at Dublin City University. In 1995, he got a faculty position at the National University of Ireland at Galway, where he remained for the rest of his academic career. As capitalism became increasingly globalized, it spilled over into academic life, and Terry spent time as a visiting researcher or faculty member at institutions in Australia, France, and China. After I started making regular visits to China in the early 2000s to give lectures and meet with colleagues, Terry and I began to work as a team, mainly in Shanghai, where we both got positions at the Shanghai University of Finance and Economics. Some faculty there had begun to work on a Chinese version of social structure of accumulation theory, and we did our best to bridge the rather large gulf between Marxist economics in China, where Marxism is the official ideology of the state, and Marxist economics in the West, where it is associated with opposition to existing economic and political systems. Our time together in China was not all serious work. We often boldly visited small local restaurants where no one spoke English, and the menu was only in Chinese. Wielding my English-Chinese pocket dictionary, we would show the server the Chinese translation, the Chinese characters for food items that seemed okay, while hoping not to see unfamiliar body parts of animals on our plates. Sometimes that worked, and sometimes it didn't. SSA theory became the main focus of Terry's academic career. This started with his dissertation and led to a 1994 edited book, Social Structures of Accumulation, The Political Economy of Growth and Crisis. That book had chapters explaining, analyzing, and applying SSA theory. The book had 3 co-editors. Terry needed a book on his curriculum vitae to get tenure at Canisius College. Michael Reich of the University of California at Berkeley had been the co-author of an influential 1982 book, Segmented Work, Divided Workers, that had launched SSA theory into the academic arena with the prestigious imprint of Cambridge University Press. My role was that I knew both of them. Our triumvirate of co-editors was born. Terry got stuck doing most of the work. Michael Reich got Cambridge University Press to publish it, and I linked the other two together. Sort of like this event. I came up with, I promoted the idea and Sean did the work. The 3 of us did a second edited book on SSA theory in 2010, Contemporary Capitalism and Its Crises, Social Structure of Accumulation Theory for the 21st Century. Those two books helped spur interest in SSA theory among not just heterodox economists, but academics in political science, criminology, sociology, and history. Through this, Terry became established as the leading authority on SSA theory, which led to many invitations for him to write articles for edited books about SSA theory. Terry pressed on with his work on SSA theory. He initiated 2 more edited books on SSA theory, one in 2014 and another that has just been published, a handbook of social structure of accumulation theory. In the new one, Sean McMahon, his former student, replaced Michael Reich as the 3rd co-editor when Michael shifted his focus toward policy work in support of the labor movement in California. At the same time as he was doing SSA academic and intellectual work, Terry also wrote about economics, politics, culture, and history of his adopted country, Ireland. Terry's intellectual style was one of thinking long and hard about an issue and surveying a large and diverse literature related to it. He paid attention to the underlying philosophy and methodology of social science analysis. He thought in complex ways and sometimes expressed his thoughts in complex ways. Terry's average sentence about serious matters, spoken or written, was usually 2 or 3 times as long as mine. And being an academic, mine are not that short. I always learned a new way of thinking about an issue after a long conversation with Terry. Not just economies go through stages. A left-wing professor's relationship with a doctoral student also goes through stages, and at its best, it grows from the inevitably unequal relation of teacher-student to that of colleague, comrade, and close friend. All of those stages happened for Terry and me. Terry was a kind and considerate person and a loyal friend. He always laughed at my jokes, even the bad ones, which make up a substantial portion of them. He found a soulmate in Marion. When my wife Karen and I visited Ireland during the week of Thanksgiving holiday one year, Marion organized an American-style Thanksgiving dinner for us at their home to make us feel welcome. A child should outlive her or his parents. Likewise, for a PhD student and her or his professor. Terry's passing came much too early. I remember him fondly and miss him dearly.
Thanks very much, David. I think you're expressing a lot of what's coming through the talks today and through the chat. So thank you for that. I'm going to pass over to John now, and we're going to have our cultural piece. John, is it?
Oopsie, I'm live. I'm not mute anymore. Okay, thanks, Sarah. As Sarah says, we're moving to the cultural slots now, as it were. And we have first Sarah Clancy. Sarah's a poet living in the west of Ireland, and she wrote one of Terry's favourite poems, and she's going to say it or read it for us now. Sarah.
Thanks a million, John. Hi, Marion. Lovely to see you, and I'm so sorry. I can't believe Terry's not actually here with us. I thought I'd tell you a small story about Terry first, if you have time. Terry helped me get into a master's course in NUIG with no credentials whatsoever to access it. And he also talked me out of a PhD for around about the same reason. But Terry had to look at an essay I had written for access to the PhD, and it was a total polemic about make poverty history years ago. And he was saying to me, this is a polemic, but I didn't know what a polemic was. So he was saying, so basically my first academic lesson from Terry was, and I didn't know he was joking because his sense of humor was so droll. He taught me that I could write a polemic if I liked, but that I had to say arguably, or it could be argued that before, if I wanted to say it in academia. So later, many years later, he came to a book launch that and I read this poem at it, and he said the good thing about poetry is you don't have to use arguably. So I think I might read that on this basis. It's not a very fitting poem, but he knew it and liked it. It's a poem that came out of the financial crisis and the circumstances that I found myself in. It's called "And Yet We Must Live in These Times." In at the housing office, the woman says, if I need a house, then I'll have to tell the council I'm homeless, or else bunk in with my parents. And I feel the heat of tears in my eyes. And let me tell you, it's not sadness I'm feeling, it's anger. After all of my years insisting that no one will ever call me victim, in they come and do it from a whole different angle I didn't see coming, and they call it helping. I'm still paying the tail end of my mortgage with no home to show for it. And I wonder what I've observed it means, even with all of my theories, my politics, this, the oldest human endeavor of seeking out shelter, has become shame-filled. On my way down through town, Rosalie asks for a $5. I give it. It's easier to offer than to ask, I reckon. And she says, ah, you are beautiful, showing the limits of her English vocabulary. But I'm not, though. What I am is damaged and raging. On days like this, I seek the sea out and breathe it. And you, what do you do to get through it? Don't call it apathy, because we're not fine. We're not grand, thanks. We're hurt, and we're making it worse. Going around pretending we're sorted. I walk on down past Griffin's Bakery as if I'm the only one in the river of people on Shop Street who's rocking a subplot, who's got things going on in the background that take effort to deal with. And that's why it's called individualism, isn't it? Because we aren't telling anyone. In the separation of one from each other, of ourselves from ourselves, we're alienated, but sure, it's grand, isn't it? We're on the pig's back, and yet we must live in these times. And I write down past tense love affairs, all the while getting older and worn out. And what use is it? Resuscitating old lovers for nothing, recycling these slogans, these dictums. If I can't write about real things, why bother? If I can't mock the signs on the wall in welfare that say, after 2 decades of working, that now I'm likely to drink in the daytime or have poor personal hygiene or to spit and swear at the people who work there and are only paying their bills, same as anyone. I fool myself. One of these days I might do it, might hurt someone, wreck something, and it might bring me to some other dimension. That's human, so they tell me. Competition and viciousness. I hope that's fiction, because the truth is I don't have it in me. I'm lacking some cruelty, because I think what's human is order and interdependence. What's human is balance and kindness and humor. And us coming up with the way we can live in these times without violence. We must live in these times and no other. But I, for one, might need some help with it. Is that too much to ask for?
Gurmila Mahagat Sarah, Satan Don Kochtach Shin. Alish Bay Auron again, O Lillis O Lyra, Kolyaki Le Terry, and all skull and show. All of a Rin na Gaelge. So as well as being a leading scholar, Lillis is an accomplished Shano singer. So he's going to sing us a lament now. Donal Og, I think, Lillis, is that right?
That's right, John. Like many others who are leaving comments, I knew Terry very slightly. I was head of school in languages and cultures and from 2010 to 2014, and I had a particularly difficult situation on my desk, and Terry really helped me to get out of it in an honest and ethical way, and I'm always grateful to him for that. And like others, I wish I had had more time to get to know him better. But even my short acquaintance with him, I'm not surprised at the things that the tributes that people are giving him today. The song Don Log is a well-known song. It's a real West of Ireland classic. It features very strongly in John Huston's film portrayal of James Joyce's story, The Dead, in translation by Lady Gregory. And because of that American connection, I think it's a particularly appropriate song to sing today. Spejagt fedin lain ismargi Agasinin rigre marchele lapoga Hag me gragetes me begbide Chyd me baredes me morkrin Niveshen grahogatun Ach grabuendenyan na federeskile One to heres, one to hear ye One to Romas, one to me One to Nyalachas, one to Nyri and Achas reward magla one to
Okay. Gormili Mahagat Lillis, that was great. So we move along now, I think, to hear from from two of Terry's former graduate students in the Department of Economics here at NUI Galway. We've got right, I'm just trying to look for my order at this stage. We've got Maria Alejandra and Maria Alejandra Gonzalez Perez, is that right? And
thank you.
You're in Medellin in Colombia, I think, at the moment, at the University IAFIT there, I think, yeah. And also Brian O'Boyle, who's closer to home, who works at NUI Galway, but in St. Angela's, Sligo. So we'll take it in that order. So Maria Alejandra, if you can go first.
Thank you, John. I'm going to read, and thank you, Kian, for organizing this memorial, and thank you for all of you who are here for honoring our beloved and admired Terry. Terry deserves this and far, far much more of this. How lucky those in heaven with his company. It is true, and anyone who had witnessed how was Terry with me knows that Terry was a father to me. Delighted, today I'm learning so many things about Terry, things that were new to me. He was always different and always made a difference anywhere he was. Terry wanted to change the world, and certainly as we witness here today, he changed our lives. Even though Terry had very clear political views, he was really always open to understanding other perspectives. His kindness and broad set of interests and many areas he was proficient in made him the most fascinating and patient person I knew. I'm tremendously fortunate to have met Terry. It was a blessing to me at the personal and professional life. I met Terry in the summer of 2003. Terry had been awarded an Irish government research grant on a structural transformation. I was very lucky that he hired Emmeline from Lahinch, Emmeline Nardone from Lahinch, Brian Boyle from Dublin 1 year later, and another year later, Fidelma Murphy from Longford, and myself from Medellin in Colombia, under that grant. The four of us were very different, and are in fact very different breeds of people. And I remember our meetings with Terry and with Brian at Terry's office in the economics department, across Claire's the secretary's office on the second floor of St. Anthony's building in NUI Galway, and besides actually Aidan's office. Terry noticed that it was very clear that our knowledge of political economy was extremely dissimilar. Well, Brian and Emily were very well advanced, and I was at the pre-kindergarten level, if you can call that. But Terry decided to put us at the same level through a weekly seminar. He tailored those sessions very, very carefully and passionate to ensure that we learn the principles of social structures of accumulation. So he went from Kondratiev, Longwaits, Marx, Ricardo, Schumpeter, Keynes, and many other fascinating theories and theorists that I have never heard about it before. Terry was very good at writing and drawing on the blackboard. His drawing of grains and farmers on his blackboard were critical for helping me to understand the dynamics of capitalism and Marxism, but mostly capitalism. I didn't understand neither of them. So Terry had very different places that were holy to him when he read, where he wrote, and one of them, it was his personal library and his studio on the second floor of his home. That one is where Marion and her family and her sister and niece and Paul is sitting right now. Another one was a comfy chair in his living room by the fireplace. And another one, it was his dining table in his kitchen. So there were breakfasts and dinners with Terry and Marion and Toby, their dog, were enormous pressures. Those memories are in my heart forever. They were like, it was a moment of time that he had finches, or they have finches. I have really lovely memories with him and Marion there, also with Sumin and Paul, with Max and Mercedes, with Josephine, with Aidan, and with Neil and other family members and friends. Was very proud when Terry traveled to Medellin, my city, where I'm right now, but where I'm from too. And he delivered a lecture on social structures of accumulation in my university. And believe me, I couldn't be prouder to say that he was my supervisor. And it was just amazing to have him. And it was feeling so proud of that. In addition of Terry exercising, he exercised his politics in many different ways. As you can see today, he was educating citizens and students. He wrote for the local and national newspaper. He even canvassed for local politicians. Neil, that is here in the audience, can tell you how much I worked with them also. He offered economic advice and also writing public speeches. Speeches, yes. My first trip with Terry was to Porto Alegre in Brazil. Marion drove us to the bus station to Dublin to get the plane, and he gave him plenty of instruction of what to do and what not to do. And he always counted on Marion's for advice for absolutely everything. So it was not only that Marion was his soulmate and his life partner, but it's like it was his advisor for absolutely everything. So in the visit, Terry prepared a list of spots to visit and of course dishes to try. As Marion perfectly described, food, it was never only food for Terry. And he also was a great explorer. He explored all the places we were walking around Porto Alegre, we walked by the river and visited every single stand of the World Social Forum. By the way, those who don't know what the World Social Forum is, like a civil society alternative to the World Economic Forum. And we traveled we did many trips together. We went to Poland, from the border with Slovakia to the very edge to Ukraine. We spent an Easter break in the Podlaska in Poland, and we had really a lovely fish that Marion can recall that fish intensely. She loved that fish, isn't it, Marion? And she absolutely wanted the recipe.
Oh boy.
It's a joke. Terry and Marion were fascinated with the Easter traditions in Poland, and we were surprised, and it was like a lot of Soviet influence in the decorations of home and in the people's clothing. Terry enjoyed the Jewish quarter in Krakow and the mountains of Zakopane and the Lech Walesas land. Terry wasn't a man of many words, as all of you know, but especially at social gathering, he was not the most active person, let's say. But regardless, he was straightforward to tell when he was interested in a conversation, and he always communicated with his eyes and his smile. As all of you know, he was super kind. Terry and Marion also, they found a home, and they found us a home in Moycollen, and I was really lucky that we lived in a walking distance of them, and I can't think on Terry without evoking Marion. To me, they were like a unit, always, and they were made one to another. Marion gave me acupuncture, proofread. I mean, she took me even to the doctor, bought medicine, everything. I mean, she proofread my writing. She drove me to the university. Marion introduced us to the family in Tyrone. And what a beautiful family. By the way, Catherine, happy birthday today. And so, yeah. Terry was a wonderful companion to all his friends, and the best teacher to his student, and the best supervisor one could dream of. To me, he was an intellectual hero. He was super patient with me. I was very demanding. Marion told me one day that I was a slave driver of Terry, but Terry was unbelievably patient. This was not only because my background was in economics, but also because of my role was in the tropic and my first language was in English. And I admit, I was very emotionally demanding of him, and Marion too. So I assisted Terry in organize a conference with world expert of, that one was the first conference of SSA, the social structure accumulation. That one was on November 26, and Terry invited academics from Egypt, France, China, England, Greece, Mexico, the United States, and other countries. And of course, Professor David Coates was there, and many others accepted Terry's invitation. Well, everyone that was invited accepted Terry's invitation to discuss the capitalist crisis and growth. And of course, his disciples, Brian O'Boyle, Emmeline, and Fidelma presented their research at the conference. And I wish Kian McMahon was there too, but probably he was in primary or secondary school in 2006. But all in that year, in 2006, all those academics, and especially Terry, anticipated the global crisis of 2008, 2009. And they analyzed why we were heading there. Terry was involved in studying capitalism and its variants. His work on Irish history was impeccable. He researched informal immigrant workers during the Celtic Tiger period. Terry studied the negative impacts of globalization in the banana industry in different countries, in Colombia, in Costa Rica, in different countries in Central America. He was very critical of the ideology, he called, and of corporate social responsibility, because he considered that it was insufficient to compensate the unfair condition of globalization, especially for workers and peasants. Terry also had also foreseen the environmental and climate change disaster, and he knew that ecological and environmental dimension of politics and economic were critical in naming a fair future for us. Terry's knowledge was immense. He was almost an encyclopedia. He knew about birds, rocks, films, geography, poetry, history, religion, wine, food, art, dogs, climate change, activism, politics, and more. I miss Terry, a spoken and unspoken word, and his written words, his gaze, his love, his silence. And I was super fortunate. I'm very thankful that I always realized how lucky I was, and I always let him know how lucky I was. So Terry was a father to me, and he always knew it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Hellender. Okay, Brian, all the way from Sligo, I think, today.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Listen. Thanks very much. Yeah. And in some ways, it's a great honor to be here. In other ways, it's quite difficult actually to speak in this way. There's a sadness. But look, as an educator, I suppose people have seen in the chat things like it seemed like 9/10 were underwater, and there was an element of Terry that was quite unassuming. And I suppose the first time I met Terry, Terry was sort of an enigma for me as an educator, because on the one hand, he was probably one of the most unassuming of the lecturers that I had at the very start when I became a student. And yet over time, he became one of the most powerful. There was like, the profundity of his insight crept up on you sort of. And so the fact that he kind of spoke in this languid style, and he was sort of, everything was really relaxed. You'd almost see it was horizontal, and yet underneath it all, there was such a strength of character and integrity and insight. Actually, he was just such a brilliant man. And so the first time I actually met him it was funny. We didn't have Zoom back then, and it was a video recording. Basically, I had got into education through a non-traditional routes. I'm from a working class family. My mother, none of us had ever been at university. I didn't do very well at school. And I had found myself in St. Angela's College, which is, as some people would know, it's 100 or so miles away from Galway. And it's a little small college, actually. That's where I work now. And they had taken on this program whereby NUI Galway would give people an education in political economy, but it was much easier to get in basically than into the traditional college. So Terry, obviously, from his perspective, wanted to further this program, and so he sent videos up of political economy. And so the first time I met him was this like bearded American talking about Karl Marx to a young guy from a working class family who had a background. My family are very Republican. It was just like a light went off, because at first when I got to university, it was like full of anxiety and will I cope, and should I be here? Am I allowed to be in places like this? Because working class people don't often feel that they can. And, I was coping by just getting through the exams, and suddenly these new categories and concepts were presented. And yes, that's why, that's the world. That explains the world. And so the Marxist analysis both explained the world, it made education exciting for me, and it has put me on a road to 20 years of political activism, which mean that I have, I've been involved in socialist politics more or less since the start. That was in the period around the Iraq War, and I've been very proud to be involved. And so for about 10 years, Terry was the most important intellectual influence on my life, but actually one of the most important influences on my life more generally, because education and politics have given me, confidence. They've given me a project. They've given me something to strive towards. And I think Terry was one of the central, if not the central focus and through all that work. People have said how much of an intellectual heavyweight he was. I really like the way David Cott said he used to think long and hard. He also used to speak long and hard, didn't he? And the thing about Terry was that he had great depth, but also a great capacity for breadth, as other people have said. I was supposed to do a PhD on the conception of competition within neoliberal theory. I ended up doing a PhD on philosophy, the philosophy of science, critique of Emile Durkheim, Giddens, all sorts of stuff. And all the way through it all, he was really patient, he was really insightful, he was really supportive. And the other thing about Terry was he was extremely loyal to people. So what, for example, when I was a student of Terry's, he would have gone out of his way to try and get funding for me to go to conferences. So he organized for me to go to America, to go to a conference in Salt Lake City, something I never would have been able to do. Just as I said, like, opening your horizons up. And when we were there, we experienced that sort of incessant demand he had for local food and so on. But actually, these are eye-opening experiences for young people who can go and do these things that they weren't able to do before. He also set me up with Michael Reich so that I could do a semester in Berkeley in California when I was a student. And he wrote numerous letters for me to try and get me a job afterwards, knowing that I was a Marxist and it wasn't going to be very easy. He probably felt somewhat responsible for making me a Marxist and probably felt he had to make sure I got a job after all of that. So the point is that, there was a sense of, as I say, real integrity there. And with himself and Marion, they opened their home, as Alejandra said, more profound in ways than the intellect was actually just the character, the person, who Terry was shone through. Because I think if I was to sum up, what he gave to a generation of people, I think was to show people there is a better world, both through his instruction, but also through his example. Because Terry wanted a better world, but he also participated in making the world a better place, making the world that he was in a better place for the people around him, as people have said. And I think what he did in terms of keeping radical political economy going for a whole generation of students in the college was a really profound achievement for Terry. I think the kindness and the warmth that himself and Terry showed me, or himself and Marion showed me, was profound as well. And as others have said, he was a mentor and a friend and a father figure and a comrade. And I just think the world is a little bit less bright today without Terry in it, but I'm glad to be able to pay this tribute to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, and thanks, Alejandra. Next, I think we have Eamon Slater. Isn't Eamon is there? Yes, indeed. Eamon is at the University of Maynooth, and he was an academic collaborator of Terry's, especially in the volume of essays, Was Ireland a Colony? So, Eamon.
Yes. Okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So today I just want to give you an insight on Terry, the intellectual, because I'm sort of torn at one level of anger, and the other sort of grief. And I've just come from a first year lecture on modern Ireland, and we're looking at the stages of development. And I was referring to our work on colonialism. And I mentioned a piece that Terry and myself had written. And it sort of dawned on me, at one stage, even during the lecture, that God, I know Terry is gone. But on another level, he ain't gone. And what I want to talk about that is it's his words and his ability to analyze and understand Ireland that I think is quite profound and rarely recognized. And that leaves me very angry. And I'll try and give you some examples of that. And I think the first time I met Terry was in DCU, and a go-between, a guy called David Jacobson, and Terry had arrived on the scene there, and I was sort of teaching foreign students there. I think David was as well. And David said, listen, would you like to meet this American, an academic just here, and he's interested in things Ireland? I said, yeah, sure. So we met, and I said, he was sort of interested in the work that I had done for my PhD. So I said, look, I'll bring in my PhD and you can read it. And at that stage as well, that'll get rid of him because at that stage, it was, you know, a cure for insomnia more than anything else. Then about a week later, Terry came back and he had read the whole goddamn thing and had written notes on it. And that's how our relationship began. We were examining in the 19th century. And when I use the word we, I want to tell you what was so interesting about working with Terry. And I need to say this first off. The one attribute that Terry had was he never allowed his ego get in the way. An argument was an argument, a point to be made, and he could step back from it and he could, And I remember the three of us sitting in Drumcondra, chatting about, God, what was it? Primitive communism, the west of Ireland, and Marion coming from her geography background, and Terry asking questions and all that. But the one thing that was really such a huge attribute of his intellect, an argument was an argument, and it was all about developing an insight. And I think that is one of the most positive aspects of Terry's intellectualism, is he could always distance himself from the points that were trying to be made. And as a consequence of that, we were able to develop a insight into 19th century Ireland. And it's only when I listen to what some of the people have been saying is Terry had an amazing ability to go off and do research on things that weren't that obvious at that. And we were, at this stage, we realized we had to go back and study Marx and Engels on Ireland. And we set about that, and we wrote a number of papers. And Terry was extremely courageous, and in the sense that he never wrote anything to please anyone else except understanding the reality behind what he was trying to understand. So he never compromised. He never said, we should write it this way or that way. If he thought the logic was what we needed to say, he was insistent that we said it that way. So we created a lot of enemies, and enemies that had an interest in sort of keeping us quiet. I think is the best way to say it. I'll just try and give you a few examples later on. So we were doing this work, and we began to reanalyze Marx and Engels on Ireland. And there was a lot of stuff written about Marx and Engels on Ireland, but from a particular, best way to describe it, nearly party line, strongly influenced by nationalistic reading, and also, funny enough, and this sounds, this was our biggest challenge. Lots of Marxists that had written on Marx and Engels on Ireland kept presuming that capitalism was the main enemy. And when we began to sort of reevaluate and look at their work, we discovered it wasn't capitalism. Capitalism did not exist in the 19th century that Marx and Engels were writing about. It was something completely different. And we realized fairly quickly we had to move in that direction, that if we were going to really represent what Marx and Engels were saying on Ireland, we had to leave a huge body of accepted understandings of not only Marxism on Ireland, but on Ireland itself. Terry had always been fascinated by political economists. And in the 19th century, we had thrown up a number of interesting ones from John Eliot Kearns. I know there was a huge interest there in Galway on Kearns, but Cliff Leslie and all of those. So he was always interested in trying to understand the economic development of Ireland. And it's sort of was always out of sync. It never fitted in. And one of the things that really bemused us was the lack of what was going on in England or Britain called the transition debate. You know, the question that any analyst of the 19th century or even the 20th century, that underlying question, when did capitalism begin? And that, so what we were arguing for, and this is what we discovered on two different fronts. First of all, what existed in Ireland wasn't capitalism. It was feudalism. Feudalism that was determined by the form of colonialization. And today it would be explained in settler landlordism. The major economic variable that was playing was not profit, it was rent. And rent was the determining of this particular. Now, this was completely opposing what the Marxists were saying. It had to be profit because capitalism is always the bad guy. Terry said, no, come on, let's move with this. Let's push this into see what we can unfold. And in one sense, and I need to say this, Terry was extremely courageous in questioning the accepted theories, both from the left and from the right. Out of that came not only that we tried to locate Ireland as a feudal economy, and that Marx and Engels were proving that, but also crucially about the whole idea of colonialism. And that colonialism wasn't just a condition of existence, but it was a process that thwarted every aspect of life. And this is where Terry's other interests, and when I heard his interest in physics and quantum and all of that, it's exactly what Marx was interested in, absolutely, and Engels and all of that. And I think the common factor here between them, and I'm leaving myself completely out of this, was they were interested in explaining reality. And this becomes very, very important because one of the things that we discovered in the last piece that we wrote, that colonialism affected all aspects of life in Ireland, but also the ecology of Ireland, the soil. Boom. Terry's work on physics and all of that sort of came to the fore. Come on, Eamon, we have to get into this, and we sort of begin to articulate this notion and of the metabolic rift in the context of Ireland. Now, just to go back and try and tell you some of the anger that I have, most of this research and writing has been totally ignored, okay? And I think that angers me. That angers me because it completely hides the tremendous intellectual power that Terry had to challenge acceptedness of theory and to go beyond the surface. And just to go back, for instance, to the transition debate about when did capitalism begin? The implication is that capitalism began very late in the evolution of Irish society, which we call peasant proprietorship. Arnsberg and Kimball talked about that in West Clare. But that type of capitalism was a savage form of capitalism. It was based upon the family farm rather than industry, because Ireland had already been deindustrialized by the British in the 18th and further back. That meant that the capitalism that emerged in Ireland was based upon small farm outlet. What that meant was you needed to reproduce that. You go into post-colonialism Ireland and you talk about the repressiveness of post-colonial Ireland. and you know, how women were treated or mistreated has to do with the small farm. And we were sort of talking about this, and this, you know, just to see the power of Terry, he was able to sort of see those linkages, those interlinks, and was subsequently able to write as easily on classical political Irish economy, James Joyce in his book on colonialism, Louis Althusser, and all of that. And it was that ability to combine the extensiveness of his research with a very intensive understanding and questioning of reality. Just two things that I just need to sort of nearly finish up on. We also, and this was completely Terry's instigation and probably Marion as well, we began to reassess the Famine Museum in Strokestown. And we were in, and Terry set the whole thing up that we were invited down, and we were to give and we did a series of lectures each weekend, and we brought in some of the, you know, international academics from Christine Keneally and all of that in front of a group of students, and about revitalizing the Famine Museum, creating a different narrative, challenging the accepted thing. Part of that project, and I remember, was we decided we needed to grow potatoes. And we set up a demonstration of the potatoes in a ridge system called lazy beds, and we had them in the garden there in Strokestown. My great idea was we were going to film it and could leave it film over the whole year, but it didn't work out. But it was just, you know, and so Terry went along with that project, and he got a brochure and, you know, did lots of work trying to revamp it. It didn't work, and nothing to do with Terry. It was a technical reasons for it. Now I just read in the news, in the newspaper, that it closed down, and they're revamping it now. And that's a, you know, such an opportunity lost. The second thing, and about sort of angers me is recently, God, I better be careful in what I say this. There has been a conference review of decolonializing Ireland, a discussion on it. And that discussion was published, I won't mention the journal, in a particular journal. We had published our article on the colonialization of Ireland by Marx about 7 years beforehand. Not one mention of the article itself, not completely obliterated within the same journal. And I said, oh my God. And you know, and I think Terry would be bemused by it. I'm slightly more angered by it. The, you know, inability to do what Terry so naturally did, was to take on board, review, analyze, and create something. And that, you know, as I said in the short piece, involved a tremendous intellectual ability, coupled with a very, very strong sense of humanity and the ability to question and to be questioned. And that is such a missing element in academia, which Terry brought to our understanding of Ireland. And it was so much fun working with him. And when I went back to see him, say goodbye, Marion was doing the talking. Terry was lying down. I said, God, things haven't changed. The quiet man of the West is still with us, and he's with us in his concepts, and it's up to us to make sure that those words and his concepts and his insights continue to be there And, hopefully my students will understand, the power of a person like Terry. Let's leave it there. Sorry, guys.
Thanks, Eamon, for those insights. Very interesting words from a collaborator. So I'm moving on now. There's something I should have done a little while ago, draw attention to the chat. We've had lots of messages coming in from nice comments from Sue Ming Koo, Derek Hambleton, Caroline Stanley, Una Muldoon, Margaret Breheny, Mick Donnelly, Paddy Gillespie, who was very helpful in putting all of this together indeed. And also Paul, a longer comment from Paul Zaremka. So I'm going to read that one. Terry arrived in Canisius College in Buffalo, New York, where I was a faculty at SUNY Buffalo. Knowing that I was a Marxist political economist, he called me up. We became fast friends from then on. He would even babysit my daughter, Nina. We were in constant communication over the years after he left Buffalo, and I was even able to meet him in Galway and, of course, Marion for the first time. We would meet at conferences over the years, including one where he took the Pilgrim Walk across North Spain after the conference. I miss Terry greatly. My wife, Beata, my daughter, Nina, and I offer our condolences to Marion and Terry's family and friends, Paul Zaremka. Now, I'll come back to some of those in a few moments. I should say as well that the people who've spoken today have provided written reflections as well. These have been put together in a booklet which is available on PDF. We're putting it up on the ICHLC web pages, and we'll be sending a link out to everybody who's here, mostly the people who are here with us today. I think there are one or two. Catherine Wiley has contributed to it. She's not with us. She can't be with us today.
She's here, John.
Oh, is she? Oh, sorry. Yes,
she's waving from the city at the back.
Oh, I see. Okay. Right.
She'll see you later.
Yes. Okay. Yes. And there's also I think Vicky Donnelly can't be with us here today, who's written a short piece as well. So you'll be alerted to that. And if there's anybody who wants to come to camera and say something in a little while, just let us know through the chat, and we'll facilitate that. Now, as people have been saying, Terry was a very engaged intellectual and academic, and we have a number of people that he worked with in outside of the university. We have here with us, we have Anne Irwin, who was with the with the Galway Community Network, I think. There's Tish Gibbons of SIPTU, and Steve Thornton, who is in the other side of the Atlantic, I think, Steve. So we'll hear from Anne, Steve, and Tish in that order. So can we start? Anne is there? Yeah. Okay, right.
John, thank you so much. And thank you so much for what is actually a true honour to be asked to speak about Terry. And I think the challenge for me is to ask, where do you begin to talk about somebody like Terry McDonough? How do you do a man like he was justice? And what's really clear to me is you didn't work with Terry in any capacity without developing a deep friendship, a deep fondness for him. And I, like a lot of people around this, everybody around the screen was absolutely mad about him. I actually first met Terry at a national level. I was working nationally with NGOs concerned with poverty and inequality. And during the recession, Terry worked with us on developing an analysis and raising awareness of the role that neoliberalism was playing in the Irish and European response to the crisis. And he was so incredibly generous with his time. And I recall a particular event in the Galway Museum where he did a great double act with Michael Taft, who I think is here today. And we all remember that great evening. And the two of them had such a gift for communicating such complex issues in a very, very understandable way. And a few years later, I have to say at that stage, I became quite a fan of Terry's. And a few years later, when I was working locally in Galway with the Galway City Community Network, which is a network of social and environmental NGOs that regularly engage with local government, our paths crossed again, and I was delighted. And he became, as he does, because Terry never ever, he wasn't a man for doing half a job. He became very, very involved, deeply involved with GCCN. He was the convener of the environmental linkage group, and that later evolved into the Galway Environmental Network, with which he and Marion were very, very active. He saw his work with GCCN as a way of impacting and having an impact on local policy. He served as chairperson of the Local Community Development Committee, which is charged with implementing a plan, a local economic and community plan that's second only in importance to the city development plan. And he really turned that around. He gave it a new importance and a new impetus. And he also represented GCCN at a national level, and he is missed at that level also. I think known for his environmental activism, particularly in Galway, Terry was just as passionate about social injustice and inequality. He loved Galway and he made an enormous contribution to the city. As an activist, he brought all his intellectual capacity to the table. His grasp of detail was just phenomenal. He'd go away and he would read entire pieces of legislation just to be prepared for a meeting. And that was matched only by his willingness and capacity to robustly engage in debates that were sometimes actually quite hostile. He never hesitated from challenging those in power, particularly when they made what he considered to be bad decisions, which, as you might think, was quite often. In terms of our own friendship, he was incredibly supportive to me personally. We regularly collaborated on issues and approaches and different ways of doing things, and he was always great for the advice. I was constantly picking up the phone to him for advice. And in some of the many tributes that have been paid to Terry since he passed, his kindness has been emphasised almost as much as his capacity for analysis and reason. Terry had an innate authority, and when he spoke, people listened. He was also really witty and fun in his own very particular way. Those of you who knew Terry knew that he rarely carried a mobile phone. And even when he did have it on him, he never answered it at all. But when he was in hospital, he used it constantly. And I used to send him what I called cartoons, but what he corrected me as, he told me they were called memes. And when I accused him of being down with the kids, he sent me a smiley face. Just before he went into hospital for the last time, Terry and Marion spent an evening in my garden in Connemara with the rest of the Galway Environmental Committee, and we're so glad to have had that time with him. Terry was taken from us too soon and too suddenly. He still had so much time to give, and there's a real sense of loss and sadness that he's gone. He's left a void that won't easily, if ever, be filled, and we miss him dearly. I think never has the Irish phrase been so apt. We won't see his like again. The Ekimid and hate reached.
Thank you, Anne. Thanks. Yeah, just going through the comments a little bit further, but before I do, I should mention that those of us who are physically in Galway or near Galway are getting together this evening at 5:30 in Ward's Hotel in Lower Salt Hill. So hope to see people there. So there's further messages I see from Paul Campbell, Eleanor Hawke, Josephine Boland, Brendan Mulligan, Michael Donnelly, Lionel Pilkington, Michael Scott, Wei Lin, Pat Collins, Kinyu Zhang. And I'll just read a message from Fiona Bateman here. Lovely tributes and great memories of Terry, whose How to Argue with an Economist was the best named module on the MA in public advocacy and activism, and possibly in the whole university. He is much missed as a colleague and friend. I've also got Andrew Mearman here. Thanks to everyone. It is sad that so often one only really appreciates someone when they're gone. From my encounters with them at conferences, Terry always struck me as a deeply thoughtful and generous person. His comments across many topics were consistently valuable. From the stories shared today, I now understand that his insightful comments about teaching economics had very deep roots. So I think I can go from that to Steve. If you're there, Steve, you are. Yes, indeed. Steve.
I am, yes. Thanks. And I'm really honored to have been asked to participate today. Very special honor. And I want to tell a very brief story. So picture this. There's snow and there's ice and it's raining down heavily on Terry and a small group of activists, all crowded at the doorway of the address 18 Congress Street in Hartford. It's a one-way street where the city's south end begins. And in the middle of the group was a young artist named Ray Adams, the building's last tenant. The government inspector arrived to deliver an eviction notice that morning, November 29th, 1976. Terry and Ray's supporters continued to block the building's entrance. The inspector brought the police, but the protesters brought the TV cameras. The officials backed off and they would not come again for 6 months. Thus, with Terry's help, Ray Adams began the public fight for affordable housing in Hartford. It was a campaign opposed to the gentrification scheme, which replaces low-income and working families with upper-income residents. Officials hoped that this influx would shore up the city's shrinking tax base, but those wealthy tenants who had any number of other housing options, they were dubbed urban pioneers or sometimes urban cowboys. Ray Adams described it as a class issue. Terry was a co-founder of the local chapter of a group that existed back in the 70s called the People's Bicentennial Commission, PBC. Nationally, the group was formed to oppose the federal government's self-serving celebration of the American Revolution. It was to be a 200 years, big pomp and circumstance, but this ragtag group from around the country decided that it was going to provide a different narrative and to create the idea that American capitalist exceptionalism was not anything to celebrate. And we posed economic democracy, as broad as that is, as an alternative. In 1976, by the way, People's Bicentennial Commission was deemed a subversive element, and a congressional subcommittee down in Washington, D.C. issued an internal security report linking the group to revolutionary tendencies around the country. PBC took on Ray's fight to keep his home, and for 9 months, Ray lived on Congress Street without heat or hot water. He was the last of 800 families who had been living in this 4-block area, some of them for as long as 35 years. And when the properties were bought by the city of Hartford and handed over to private developers, the living conditions there rapidly deteriorated through neglect and vandalism, and the tenants suspected sabotage. With Terry's help, Ray Adams became a community celebrity. He used his fame to visit other apartment renters who were fighting evictions or landlord neglect, but they were all doing it separately and none of the others knew that the others existed. Hartford tenants began to organize for more control over their housing conditions, frequently raising the slogan, "People before profits." 6 months after the failed eviction, police and city officials took Ray and his supporters by surprise, threatening to break down his door and with a sledgehammer and an axe, and prepared to throw his belongings out in the street. Ray decided it was time to move. And he did what he had really wanted to be doing that year, and that was to moving down to New York City's Soho, the arts district. His fight, though, had defined the way Hartford looked at urban renewal and gentrification and the housing crisis with new eyes. So now jump ahead to 45 years later. There's a walking tour of college students from Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. And it was stopped at one end of Hartford's train station, because that's where Terry had worked. The Shanti School, which people have mentioned already, a publicly funded alternative high school, was located at the front end of the train station. The students, this was just last year, the students unfurled a banner with a photo of the school's founder and with some Shanti students at the time. They tucked red roses across the iron staircase, and they weren't even born when Terry lived and worked in Hartford. But fortunately, events like this today keep his memory alive. And I want to show you two brief photographs, and we'll see if they actually work or not. I know I should have used some other technology, but there's a picture of Ray Adams standing in front of his house. I guess we invited the newspapers too. And you can't really tell from here, but this is a picture of Terry right here in the bottom corner. You only see the very top of his head. Actually, you can't see any number of us really, but I'm way in back. But Terry's right there. And that's the only picture we have of that particular action. But the students who put down the roses and had the celebration of Terry, this is a picture of them. This was from last summer. They learned a lot, maybe, I hope, from that tour, but especially from the fact that they were in a place where Terry had been, where this kind of activism and intellectual activity and critique could come together. And that was Terry's life as we knew him back then. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve, for that very interesting account of actions long ago. We have some more contributions in the chat, which you can all refer to there. There's one here from Jim Brown, a former president of the university here. I'm sorry that I have to leave this very fine adventure to another commitment. Terry was a very fine person and will be greatly missed. He carried his learning lightly and articulated his strongly held views with great integrity and humility. We have also, in acknowledging, I suppose, the assistance that we got in putting the thing on, to acknowledge the Creative Workers Co-op based in Belfast, who designed the booklet, which I referred to earlier with the comments, or with the various contributions, which is available, as I said, as a PDF, and you'll be alerted to that if you've signed up here. We've also got notes from Nata Devuri, Anita Danks, Michael Taft, David Jacobson, Neil O'Brolachan, Martina Finn, Mary Byrne, Oana Nicora, I think, if I'm reading my writing properly. I might just read Nata Devuri here. What moving trivets by Maria, Alandra and Brian. The essence of Terry has been captured so beautifully by them in their stories of their journey of learning with Terry as their guide. Okay. Martina Finn here. Thanks so much, everyone, for hosting this very special event and tribute to an amazing, inspiring, kind and generous man. And thank you all so much for sharing your beautiful memories and connections and on the profound impact Terry has had on so many lives. His love and spirit lives on most wonderfully in his beloved Marion. Thank you so much. Okay. There's a message here from Agelas Panayotopoulos. I think he's back in Greece, as far as I know now, but this comment refers to time in Ireland. Thank you all for sharing these beautiful stories. I met Terry in activist work Michael Flynn, myself and others were doing at the Mechanics Institute in Limerick 8 years ago. Terry delivered a talk titled The 6-Point Alternative to Austerity, a Radical Plan on a Beer Mat. I met Terry and Marion a few times since, mostly at conferences, and their kindness and generosity will always stay with me. Okay, I'll leave that for the moment and hand over to our next speaker, Tish Gibbons of SIPTU.
Thanks very much, John. And hello, everybody. Marion in particular, hello. And condolences again from myself and Eugene to you and all of Terry's family. And thanks, Keane, and everybody else involved in organising today, just for the chance to reflect on some of Terry's contribution to the Irish labour movement. And no matter where you turn, there is evidence of such contribution. His co-authoring with David Jacobson and Keith Warnock of Mind Your Own Business, Economics at Work, published jointly by SIPTU in 2001. The development with Jason Lockery of the HEAP chart in 2009. The HEAP chart, I learned at the time, was a hierarchy of earnings, attributes and privilege, with an accompanying booklet published by the Irish Congress of Trade Unions and TASK, the think tank for action on social change. He was a co-founder, I believe, of the Irish Centre for the Histories of Labour and Class, which I should have known and I didn't know until lately. He taught at the Irish Congress of Trade Unions and at the People's College. And last but not least, I suppose, particularly for myself, the work he did with SIPTU College when I was there in redesigning our economics modules. And that's only some of it. His legacy is truly profound. And these are just some examples from Ireland alone. And many of those who worked with him on these ventures were in touch at the time of his death or while preparing for this memorial. And without exception, they all remarked on his popularity and the esteem in which he was held, not only for his clear thinking and obviously really appreciative of the Marxist perspective, but also his gentle and engaging manner. And people shared an anecdote or two, and I've tried to work them in, time and space permitting as we go along. I'm very conscious too that his commitment to the labour movement and labour education was honed long before he came to Ireland. Several speakers have mentioned the Shanty School. And I know that he subsequently worked at the School of Industrial and Labour Relations at Cornell and developed campaigning materials with the United Auto Workers Union. He first worked with SIPTU, as far as I know, in the late 1990s. And that work culminated in 2001 with the publication of Mind Your Own Business. And this was not, and it was never intended to be, a typical business text. Instead, it was aimed at removing some of the mystique that has been allowed to envelop the subject of economics and business. And its purpose was to provide Irish trade union members with the skills and knowledge they needed to understand the basics of the economy. That is, to provide a basic economic literacy for people, who came from different backgrounds. And it's still a recommended text at SIPTU College. And we'd had an initial conversation about a second edition before we were overtaken by COVID and life, and sadly by death. An even more major contribution to the labour movement by Terry was his work on that HEAP chart and the booklet for ICTU and TASK. And it was an incredibly clear and informative way of demonstrating basic facts regarding our socioeconomic structure. It exposed inequalities by reference to income, occupation and household type. And it too is still widely used in labour education and by those campaigning on social and economic justice issues. And I was familiar with his work, and I knew him from a distance, maybe to nod to. But I only really met him properly for the first time, maybe 10 years ago or a bit less. As a newly appointed head of SIP to college, I was on a mission. I knew I needed someone from his perspective to guide us through the replacement of an orthodox approach to economics in our programs. And I had been talking to Keane about that, knowing Keane long since from his father was a colleague of my own. But still, I felt a bit intimidated at the thought of approaching Terry, not least because my grasp of the social structure of accumulation theory wouldn't have got me very far in any conversation with him. But as luck would have it, I met Terry. We were each part of the Ella Baker School of Organising inauguration event at Unite HQ in London. And with our respective spouses, Marion and Eugene, we spent, as I remember, a very convivial afternoon in a pub nearby. Food obviously was very far up the agenda. I don't think the food was great, Marion, but obviously there was wine or something that made up for it.
Something that made it convivial.
Yes. And Terry's easy manner really facilitated, it got me over my sort of my shyness or whatever it was. And he brought such a breath of fresh air with him. The dismal science was anything but dismal in his hands. And the work he did with us, which was really important, because again, he was talking to people who came from totally different backgrounds, sometimes without, any academic background at all. But he cut through the mainstream orthodoxy, but he did so with academic rigor and a really, quietly determined good humor, I think was the best way to describe it. His method of delivery and the legendary presentations and graphics really meant that participants felt confident about reimagining and discussing economics. He never condescended, and he never once mentioned his social structure of accumulation theory either, not once, as I recall. And as was the way with Terry and, of course, Marion, there was another convivial evening. This time we were celebrating in Brafey House in Castlebar, I think, Marion. We were celebrating with the tutors, and I see quite a few of them here today. Era and Colin are there. And we were celebrating, we'd had a marvelous session, really tearing apart and rebuilding, the whole way that we approached economics for union members and for staff. And we knew what we had was going to travel. And we often talk about that evening. And I don't know, Marion, maybe you can remember, but we all remember that something funny happened because you've only to mention Terry and pink champagne and everybody starts laughing. But for the life of us, none of us can remember what the joke was, or maybe we drank it. I don't know. The detail is long lost.
The wine waiter came along, and somebody in the group thought that he was offering a bottle of pink champagne. So we said, sure. And he opened it up and poured it out. Turns out he was selling us a bottle of pink champagne.
I don't know if you should hold that, because I probably had to pay for it.
No, you were very concerned at the time.
It was all lost in the celebration of the achievement, his achievements, and the laughter and the camaraderie of the evening. But he could go the other way too. When I was, talking to people about, things that they remembered, talking to somebody from Task, and he always enjoys telling the story of how he and Terry were attending the same conference in Canada some years back. And they had each prepared their presentations, with such detail and attention to detail, and both from a sound Marxist perspective, I would hope. But anyway, when they got there, it soon emerged that the audience was much more conservative than they had anticipated. And the colleague, who shall remain nameless, quickly adjusted his paper to suit the audience. And Terry did the opposite, just to provoke. So, I thought that was a really typical one. And, how do you measure the loss, of somebody like that? To all of you and to the union movement. And I suppose the answer really is what he would have taught us. Not everything is quantifiable at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Tish. Silent claps. Okay, right. Very interesting and insightful again. Now, I think that takes us to the end of the panelists that we had. I have more messages from Garage Barry, Erin Gallagher, Jacinta Fay, Ger Turley, Paul Boyd, the Boyd family joining from London. Not knowing Terry in his professional life, it's been wonderful and inspiring to hear of his work and its impact. A wonderful man who shall be missed. Love to Marion and Terry's extended family and friends. Alessandra Mesadri. I did not know Terry well, but we met in Pula at IIPPE. I don't know what that is, in 2019, but I knew his work since my graduate student days. SSA shaped my way of thinking then, and when I met him, I was so very honored. He was a great presenter and a kind and funny person. Michael Scott, such a touching memorial event. It is lovely to hear such heartfelt contributions from friends and colleagues. As a founding member of the Galway Environmental Network, Terry was a stable and guiding voice at committee meetings. He was humble, incisive, and never condescending when we often veered off topic. Marion, we hold you in our thoughts. Gerard Turley, one of Terry's great traits was that even if you disagreed with his views and were not able to keep up with his breadth and depth of knowledge, he was always very tolerant and understanding of others and their perspectives. Jacinta Fay, thank you all to the organisers and to everyone for sharing your memories and stories. A beautiful tribute. I'm not surprised to learn he was an activist since school. Galway will continue to feel his enormous loss. Colin Whitston, just to second what Tish has to say about Terry's contribution to the revamp of SIPTU's economics modules. Terry was that all too rare phenomenon, an intellectual and academic on the left who really did work inside and with the labour movement and with workers. We've got Suming Koo as well. Thank you everyone for the heartfelt tributes to Terry and for reminding us what a great role model Terry was for any research, educational and activist work. I'm afraid we have to leave to hold a different session, so missing the afterwards. Tony Dundon, who's I know coming out of a class as well in UL. Terry was not only an informed academic, he had that rare attribute to connect scholarship with public engagement. We worked together with Maria on migrant worker rights in Gort and to global neoliberalism. A legend. Thanks all. Best, Tony. These are, yeah, I'm not going to be able to keep up with these. They're coming in so quickly. And I'm sorry I've missed out on some. And again, sorry for stumbling over a few of the introductions. I was under pressure at a certain stage, so please bear with me. So I think I'll just mention the remaining comments that have the people who have commented: Etna Murphy, Elaine Harvey, Vincent Carraher, Gail Radford, David Jacobson. I think if I read those, there'd be another 10 before I finished. So I think I'd probably cut it off at that point. We're approaching 3 o'clock, which is the terminal point in any case. Now, this is not the end of it. A recording of this will be available and the comments will be available to people who are here. You'll be alerted about the web address, and as I said, also to the PDF of the contributions to the booklet, of which a small number have been produced. For my own part, I'd just like to say it's been a privilege to have been involved in this. It's been a very moving event and an informative event with diverse perspectives, and it was good to see everybody to meet everybody, even if it's a sad occasion in some respects, as well as being a celebration. So with that, I'll just finish it up. Okay. Thank you. Thanks to everyone.